Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to another session of the Awakening series. Today, 2nd of August, we are having Awakening series number 8. So this is the 8th in the series, and today we will be covering the third part of Paṭiccasamuppāda, Concurrence of Logical Antecedents, according to the lessons taught by Bhante Punnaji. Before I begin, I would like to share with you this link. Please feel free to use this link to download. So let's begin with today's sharing. So what we have done so far in the Awakening series, you can go to that link on the top there. After today's sharing, you can then access that link, tiny.cc/BillyTanVideos. And you can then look through all the videos that I have uploaded. We have done 7 already in the Awakening series. Number 1 and number 2, we covered Paṭiccasamuppāda. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Number 1 and number 2, we covered Pancha Upadhana Kanda, the process of perception, part 1 and part 2. And number 3, we did question and answer because there were many questions arising from the Panchakanda series. Then number 4 and number 5, we covered awakening of the Bodhisattva. That means how the Bodhisattva Siddhartha practiced meditation and followed 2 teachers and reached the point where he finally stopped the mind. So all that is mentioned in those 2 sharing. And then the last 2 weeks we did in number 6 and number 7, part 1 and part 2 of Paṭiccasamuppāda, Concurrence of Logical Antecedents. So we won't be repeating any of that. Part 1 basically gives you a summary overview of Paṭiccasamuppāda as taught by Bhante Punnaji. Part 2, we covered in great details the first part of the Paṭiccasamuppāda, the first 6 links, the first 6 stages. There are 12 altogether, so we covered the first 6 in last week. We will just quickly run through that again before we continue with the remaining part of Paṭiccasamuppāda. So let's go back to how it all began. The Bodhisattva Siddhartha meditated until he managed to stop the mind. And stopping the mind is Sanya Vedayita Nirodha. And Bhante Punnaji calls this insentience, a state of insentience where the mind had stopped completely. And when the Bodhisattva woke up from that state where the mind had stopped, he became fully enlightened as the Sammasambuddha. So let's quickly run through the first part of it that we already covered last week. So Bodhisattva Siddhartha meditated until the mind had stopped, so there was no sensation, no feeling. And Bhante Punnaji calls this state insentience. Then the word avijja actually meant no not knowing, no knowledge. That means the person had reached a point where there is no consciousness. Right? So this is the state. And from that point, the Bodhisattva woke up, and as he woke up, he had now become the Sammasambuddha. And the waking up started when the Panchakanda, the process of perception, kick-started. So the brain started and then the consciousness returned. And the first thing that happened was that there was sanya and vedana, sensations and feeling, that were then constructed. And this mental construction of sensory entities visualized began to produce the perception, vijnana. And this is the perception of constructed objects. Whatever object was perceived by any of the sense organ that had been stimulated at that point of waking up. This is the beginning of the cognitive process, the mano. This is the awakening of the mano. So now the cognitive process kicks in. So the mind begins to work properly. And from there, the Buddha was able to witness how it all unfolded. I explained a little bit about the Papancha Sanya Sanka, categorized identification of perceived object in the cognitive process. Now, bear in mind, this is the cognitive process. This is the time when the mind is working, but there is no emotions yet. This is purely the cognitive process that has just woken up. So the first awakening from insentience, the cognitive process kicks in. As Sankara started, the cognitive process kicks in. So this is without emotions. This is the cognitive process. Papancha Sanya Sanka is a cognitive process. Now, there was a question from one of the audience, which I missed last week as I was closing. The question came in at the last moment, but I missed it, so I must apologize for it. So that was the question that I promised I will answer this week, where the audience, that the person asked, Papancha Sanya Sanka is translated as categorized identification of perceived object. Why not Papancha Vijnana Sanka? So in other words, the person was asking, why is it Papancha Sanya Sanka and not Papancha Vijnana Sanka? Okay, Sanya is the sensation, Vijnana is the perception. When we speak of Papancha Sanya Sanka, this process of Papancha is identification process. And this is the cognitive process to identify what was perceived through the sense organs. So when we speak of perception through the sense organ, the first thing that comes in is sanya. And sanya is, let's say we use the eye sensation, using the eye as the explanation for this. So light entered the eye, and so sanya is the light sensation that stimulated the retina in the eyeball. Now, all this I already explained in great detail in number 1 and number 2 awakening series in the Panchakanda, so I'm not going to repeat that. So sanya is the stimulation, and then construction started, and Sankara basically constructs all these millions of light sensations that stimulated the eyeball. And then in the process of constructing, there is a interpretation process, Papancha, which assigns the sensations to their respective category. So Sanka, in this case, the word Sanka here, Papancha Sanya Sanka, this word Sanka is not the word Sankara. It does not refer to Sankara. Papancha Sanya Sanka, this word Sanka here refers to category. The word Sanka here means category. And this is category based on the perceiver's past experiences, assigning various light or colors, as we call it. When light enters the eye, it goes into the brain and it gets processed, and then we become aware of colors. So it's actually assigning this construction of colors into respective categories, Sanka. That's why it's called Papancha Sanya Sanka. And from there, it produces the Vijnana. Here it is the Vijnana of the eye. So it's the eye perception. That's Chakku Vijnana. So in other words, Papancha is assigning the Sanya into respective category as it is as Sankara is constructing the millions of Sanya and Vedana actually, as these millions of Sanya being constructed, then the Papancha process will assign them to respective category. I'll show you in a moment how that works graphically, right? And that's why it's called Papancha Sanya Sanka and not Papancha Vijnana Sanka, okay? And then it produces a mental image, rupa, of the perceived object, right? And then when the rupa arises, with the completion of Vijnana, the rupa arises, then the identification will assign a name, right? So a name is assigned to this rupa, nama, label or name of perceived object. So the mental image of the perceived object is rupa, and the label or name assigned to it is nama. And this completes the whole process of this Vijnana. So that then the next thing after Vijnana is nama rupa, okay? So I hope that is clear, but I'm going to show you graphically to explain this a little further so that you can see clearly, okay? Let's, I hope you're ready for this. Very interesting what I'm about to show you. Now, when I show this image, Some of you may be aware of what it is, but some of you may not. But let's see. If I were to compress this image, it becomes more and more clear what it is, right? So I hope by now all of you can see roughly what it is. So what I first showed you are basically bits and pieces. Now this is exaggerated. It is not so coarse. The actual color dots, right? Each dot here, a pixel. Each pixel supposedly represents one set of sanya. But in reality, the dot is very, very minuscule, nano size. It is not so coarse. I'm just showing it like that so that you can see it roughly to get an idea what it is. But actually, it's even much smaller than that. But so all these are in individual sanya being constructed together. And that construction, Bhante Punnaji calls it like building a brick wall, right? Piece by piece, it is constructed together to build the full object, to build the object. And what is the object? That is the object. So piece by piece, each dot, each pixel is then constructed to build that object. As it is being constructed to build this object, this process begins to assign the colors to the respective categories. So you have various objects. Now the word object, I must also point out, the word object is a very tricky word because that word object is very ambiguous. When we say object, we say, let's say the eye. Look at the eye of Mona Lisa. Each eye is an object, right? The image of the eye, that is an object. The nose, that is an object. The mouth, that is an object. And yet, when you look at this Mona Lisa, the whole face, that is also an object. So object has many levels we're talking about. At the most minuscule level, then it is maybe one small identifiable feature in this image. That is an object. Then, you know, like the eye, for example, is perhaps the eye is one of the identifiable features in this image. But the whole image of Mona Lisa, that is also an object. That is the object of the face of Mona Lisa. Or if you look at the screen, then it's the whole thing, including the dotted lines, including my face. That is also a whole object of the computer screen you're looking at, right? So that whole thing itself is also an object. So the word object is very ambiguous. So in this case, when we say constructing colors into object, we're talking about the object of the eye, the nose, the mouth, these kinds of objects. So all these objects come together to form the big picture. And that big picture is the vijnana, the eye perception. Now you have an eye perception of what has been constructed and categorized as eye, nose, mouth, and the whole thing. Then you can see it's the face of a person. And now you're able to identify this person as Mona Lisa. But this identification of Mona Lisa is at a very high level. At the very low level, when this individual sanya is being processed, there is already an identification according to the category they belong to, and that is why that is called Paṭiccasamuppāda. Right? So that is how that works. Now I'm going to show you 3 different ways about Paṭiccasamuppāda. So here, from this construction, this is one example of Paṭiccasamuppāda. Now I'm going to show you 2 other examples. I hope you're ready for it. Very interesting. The next one, colors. Now this is part of a painting. Somebody just splashed colors onto the canvas and produced a painting. This is part of a painting, right? Not the complete painting, one part of it. So to the artist, this is one object. Right? Actually, it is maybe more than one object here, but to the artist, this is one object. But can you see what this object is? I don't think so. Can you tell what this object is? I don't think so, even though you are seeing this whole object. But if I were to show you the full picture, this is the full picture. And that object that I showed you a moment ago, okay, pause here. This is the full picture, the whole painting. The whole painting is an object. What I showed you earlier on was just a part of that painting there. The horse rider, the jockey riding the horse. Actually, this is a very famous painting by Jean Dufy. They are two brothers, Raoul and Jean Dufy. Both of them are very talented impressionist artists, and they have very similar style. In fact, sometimes I can't even tell the difference from the painting of one brother to the other. Raoul, R-O-A-L, they are both French. Raoul Dufy, D-U-F-Y, and Jean Dufy, J-E-A-N, Jean Dufy, both of them. I think this one is by Jean Dufy. Later on, we will see another one by Raoul Dufy. They almost look like coming from the same artist, but it's two brothers with very similar style. Their style is this, like that, just a few strokes, a splash of colors, and it gives you the impression of a full object there. So from here, you can see that's a horse and someone riding on it. It's easy to see that. And the whole thing is actually a race course. There's a horse race going on. So if you go back to the actual little image, part of that image, you can't tell what it is. So this is colors being assembled together. And when you see this, that construction to form this object, beginning to assign the head, the face, the hands, the horse, all these are categories. So this is Papancha Sanya Sanka, another example. I'll give you another example from another painting. This one is by Raoul Dufy. Okay, so you can see this splashes of color, but you can't tell what it is. Some of you may be able to tell a little bit about on the right-hand side, but never mind. If you look at this, it's hard to say what you see, but I will show you the whole painting. The whole painting looks like this. Again, you can see the style of Raoul Dufy is very similar to Jean Dufy. So you can see what you saw a moment ago was that little thing on the bottom left. And it looked like a man with a hat and a lady in blue. Right? That's what it is. A man with a hat on the right-hand side. You can see the eyes. And then on the left side, vaguely, a lady wearing a blue dress, but you can hardly tell, but more or less a lady in a blue dress. If you look at that, then you can sort of notice. So what happens here is that your mind creates the perception of that whole image because it was able to identify and assign each of these colors into a category. The face of a man, the head of the man, the eyes, all this, right? So that is Papancha Sanya Sanka. Now let's take a look at the explanation by neuroscientists from Harvard Medical School. There's a neuroscientist from Harvard. Let's take a look at a video of this neuroscientist.
Neurobiologist Margaret Livingston believes that artists were always a step ahead where the secrets of sight were concerned.
This is a painting by Raoul Dufy that illustrates something that artists figured out that turns out to have a deep neurobiological basis. And what they figured out is that you don't have to color inside the lines. You see this often in watercolors and pastels. This is an oil painting. It's almost a parody of the watercolor technique. The neurobiological basis is that cells that code color have big, coarse receptive fields. They have low acuity, much lower than the cells that encode contour. So because your visual system doesn't use the color to define the borders of an object, the color can be kind of sloppy, and you just assign the color to the nearest border. And so that's what he's doing here. Of course, these artists discovered it long before us neurobiologists. But you just have contours with some soft color approximately in the same position as the contour, and your visual system just assigns that color to that object.
So now you take a look at the painting, right? That was described by the neuroscientist. You can see that in this painting, colors are not put into box, whatever the box is, a chair or the person, the body. The colors are splashed. They are not fully inside the contours. And yet we are able to assign meaning to it and call this painting of the people standing there, the chairs, and so on. Okay, I'll give you, this is the second example. Now I'm going to show you the third example. Third example is what we call useful perception. This is again another example of Paṭiccasamuppāda, how our brain process colors and try to make sense of it and turn it into useful perception. Cakkhu viññāṇa is the perception. So by putting the colors together, we make meaning out of it to make it useful. So let's look at this explanation by this neuroscientist, Bo Lotto. Very interesting.
This man, experimental neuroscientist Bo Lotto, is going to show you why your brain is constantly being fooled by what it sees.
What illusions tell us is that what we're trying to see is not the world as it is, but something else. We're actually generating perceptions of a world that's useful to see. And that useful perception doesn't actually have to correspond with what's actually there. When you open your eyes, right, first time in the morning, say, do you think you see the world as it really is?
I say yes.
Yeah, you're seeing it. Oh, you're
seeing
definitely.
and believing.
That depends if I'm wearing my glasses or not. Yes.
Yes. Yes?
I think so.
I mean, why not? All right, well, look at this cube here. What if I told you that those two surfaces are exactly the same? Would you believe me?
I wouldn't.
Okay, come on up. Okay?
Bo has attached a gray swatch to one of the surfaces to allow you and the volunteers to test this one out for yourselves.
Take that dot and move that nice up here, right there.
Oh my God. No way. I want to look again.
This is crazy.
It's mind-boggling.
What's going on?
Tell us.
Are we changing the surface? What's
No.
changing?
Our perception.
Our perception's changing.
Yeah.
Okay, why? That's the question. If we could understand this, we would understand how the brain works.
Are you wondering why this happens? How two distinctly different shades of gray could actually be the same color? In this case, it has to do with how your brain uses shadows to make decisions about what it's seeing.
Your brain's using its past experience to generate its perceptions of the world. And so the brain looks at this image and it says, this surface is in shadow. Okay? If this surface were actually in shadow and returning the same amount of light to your eye as this surface, which seems to be in light, this would actually have to be more reflective. There's less light hitting it, but the same amount is hitting your eye as this one, right? And so that's why you see it as lighter.
Yeah, what Bo Lotto was saying is that what we're trying to see is not the world as it is, but something else. So what was he referring to? Well, we're actually generating perceptions of a world that is useful to see. In other words, in our mind, we begin to interpret and give meaning to it so that it is useful. But it is not necessarily what it is out there. So it is something else. You saw earlier on in that video that the shades of gray are actually the same, but it looks different. I'm going to show that again in a moment. So we're actually generating perceptions of a world that is useful to see. That useful perception doesn't have to correspond with what is actually there. That means, our mind actually interprets and assigns them to categories so that it becomes useful and we are able to make sense of it, but it may not necessarily be truly what it is. So now, just be careful of the words here. It says, your brain is using its past experience to generate its perception of the world. I'd like to clarify one important point. I noticed when I was, this is one of the many documentary I have from neuroscientists. And I noticed many neuroscientists and psychologists, when they talk about the brain and the mind, somehow they use the two words interchangeably. They don't differentiate what is brain and mind. Actually, brain is just a biological system of neurons, chemicals, electrical charges, and the activity of the neurons, the chemicals, the electrical charges all together produce, produce this consciousness that we call mind. So it's the activity of the brain that is the mind. The brain is not the mind is not the brain, but the activity of the brain is the mind. But just to let you know, a lot of these brain scientists, these neuroscientists, they don't differentiate between the word brain and mind. They use the two words interchangeably. What he should have said here is mind, not brain. The mind is using its past experience to generate its perception of the world. So we actually try to perceive the world in a useful way. Now, let's take a look at that picture. Obviously, if you look at this picture, you will notice that the upper half is darker than the lower half. Agree? That's what it appears to you, right? Now, let's begin to cover it up. If I were to start to cover it up, it still looks like the upper half is darker than the lower half. Now, as I cover it up further, watch carefully and don't blink. Just watch the shading between the upper half and the lower half. Now, what do you see? Aren't they the same? Actually, they are both the same. All right, let me just take it off. What I want you to do now is, I will enlarge this picture. What I want you to do is use your finger, close one eye and block so that you block out the middle portion. The middle portion, and see what you see. So now, we close one eye, use your finger, horizontal, block out the middle section. Right? Just like the way I block out with the black box. And you will then see the two are basically the same. So what do you think? You see, your mind interpreted the darker upper half and the lighter lower half, but in reality, the two halves are the same. But because of the brightness in the middle, next to the darkness, the darker shades, then somehow, well, I can't explain why this illusion arises, but this is an illusion. Your mind is fooling you. So this is also an important lesson, right, for all of us. Don't always believe what you see with your eyes, because what you see is not necessarily what is really, really out there. The two shades are the same, but what you see appears to you in your mind darker. The upper half is darker, the lower half is lighter, when in actual fact, they are both identical. So this is really another process of Papancha Sanya Sankha, where colors are being assigned categories. And in this case, it is category of shading. Right? It's not category of face or object or what, but shading. And somehow, to make it useful, it appears that it produces the perception, the vijnana, the chakku vijnana in your mind, that the upper half is darker than the lower half. So this is another example of Papancha Sanya Sankha. It is not Papancha Vijnana Sankha, okay? So I hope that answers all this question. In fact, these three examples are very helpful to teach us that don't believe what you see with your eyes. You think it is true, but it is not necessarily the way you see it or perceive it, no matter how good your eyesight is. Right? So now we have this perception, vijnana, perception of the constructed object. And we begin to assign a name to this mental object that arises as a rupa, mental image, and the constructed entity and categorized identity. And then we have 6 senses. So applying all the 6 senses together, we then have a more complete experience of the world, experiencing the six sense fields. Again, I'm using that same example I used before. That example is that think of yourself walking along the park. Right? So as you go along the park, you see a dog coming towards you. So first you are seeing the dog coming towards you. And then you hear the dog barking. As the dog barks, you hear the dog. So now you see, you hear. As the dog comes closer, and the dog has been out there the whole afternoon, so the dog perspired a lot. So there's a bit of a perspiration smell coming from the dog. And you start to smell it. Oh, it doesn't smell so nice. But it's a very cute little dog. So you like it. So you pick up that little dog. It's a small little puppy. So when you pick it up, you start to touch it. So you see all your senses are interacting with that object. You see the dog, you hear the barking, you smell the perspiration of the dog. Now you pick up the dog and touch the furry skin. You like the dog. Then the dog begins to lick you, and somehow you tasted the saliva of the dog. So now all your five physical senses have come into play, and you have a full experience of the dog. And then you begin to put all this together and think of the dog as a whole, and not just a dog out there, but this is a cute little dog. I like it so much because it's so friendly. It is licking my face and it is barking in a very sweet way. So the whole experience is a wonderful experience. That's how you can put all these six sensual fields together to complete this experience. And now you have a full experience of something out there, the world out there. Cognition become, so this Phassa is really the cognition becoming conscious of the objective experience. The whole experience out there is the objective experience. And you become aware and you create the concept of a world out there. So to you, that moment when the dog you're holding, that world is, you picked up a dog in the park. So that whole thing is like the world to you at that moment. So the world at that moment is that you are interacting with the dog in the park. That is the world, so to speak, okay? So that is the complete experience of the six senses, giving you the full experience of the objective experience, right? So Phassa is really this, creating this concept of the existence of a world out there. Bhante Punnaji will explain this, right? Basically, this is this completes the cognitive process. So this is now the cognitive process. The mind is fully aware of an objective experience, right? So now when the mind becomes aware of this objective experience, you begin to feel whether this objective experience, you like it or you don't like it. So the feeling of this objective experience is Vedana. Feeling of this objective experience, whether you feel it is pleasant or unpleasant. So when you picked up the dog and interacted with the dog, now you are basically feeling whether that experience with that dog is pleasant or not pleasant, assuming you like the dog. So now it's a very pleasant experience. So you have a pleasant feeling about the experience with the dog. The dog itself is the objective experience, and now you feel something about it, and that feeling is Vedana. But one thing I want to point out very clearly, this Vedana here is how you feel about the objective experience out there. So it's the objective experience out there, and it's not really the same as down there, that feeling, that other feeling at the bottom there in the part of the Panchakanda. The Vedana in the Panchakanda is really talking about the feeling of each sensation, the light sensation. But the feeling up here in this Paṭiccasamuppāda is referring to the feeling of this objective experience, whether your objective experience is pleasant or not pleasant, right? It's not talking about sensation. In the Panchakanda, the Vedana refers to the pleasantness or unpleasantness of each sensation. In the Paṭiccasamuppāda, in number 7, the Vedana there is referring to the pleasantness or unpleasantness of this objective experience you have just experienced, the world that you have just experienced. So let's listen to Bhante Punnaji explain this.
Once the object is formed, we are going to make use of the feeling in the object. You may get a pleasant feeling in the object, or you may get an unpleasant feeling in the object. And the moment you get the feeling, you react to that object with a desire or hatred. You see, it's an emotional reaction to the object. That emotional reaction, the Buddha called Tanha. Tanha is not craving. Today, Rice Davids use the word craving. But Tanha is not craving. Tanha is the emotional reaction. A craving is wanting something. But here we not only wanting, if we dislike something, we don't want it. We want to get rid of it. So therefore it is not a craving, it is the emotional reaction.
So Bhante was saying that when you experience the objective experience, there is a feeling, Vedana. So that feeling is either pleasant or unpleasant. And when you experience this pleasantness or unpleasantness of the feeling of the objective experience, you begin to react to it. And that reaction is Tanha. Tanha is emotional reaction. Bhante was saying Tanha normally translated as craving. It's not craving because you have three emotional reactions: Lobha, Dosa, and Moha. Lobha means if it is something pleasant, you want more of it. Lust and greed, that's what Lobha means. Dosa, if it is something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. Aversion and hatred, that's what Dosa means. And Moha, Moha means whatever it is, you begin to personalize that experience and you feel that that I like it or I don't like it, and there is this personalization. So you begin to have the delusion of a self-centered existence. That's moha. So lobha, dosa, moha. And that's why it's not craving, it's emotional reaction. So when you have this Vedana, the feeling about this objective experience, and that leads to your emotional reaction to the feelings of the objective experience. And there are three types of tanha. The first type is kama tanha. Kama tanha here means you are reacting to the sensual feelings of pleasure, sensual pleasures. So basically you react to pleasant feelings. Then the second type is vibhava tanha. Vibhava tanha is you're reacting to unpleasant feelings, right? Displeasures, right? And you don't want it to exist. That's why it's vibhava. You want to get rid of it. And then the third type comes with upadhana. So as you react, then you begin to personalize your reaction, personalizing this reaction as your subjective experience. So in other words, that thing out there is the objective experience, and now you have felt something about it, and this feeling leads you to want to react. That reaction is your subjective experience. Right? Bhante will explain this further in a moment. So this subjective experience you begin to personalize. That's why it's called upadhana. And with this personalizing of this subjective experience, right, your reaction, then this personalizing of the reaction as a subjective experience, it leads to bhava tanha, which is you begin to have the delusion of a self-centered existence, right? So this is moha, lobha, dosa, moha. So these are the three types of reactions that are manifested as lobha, dosa, and moha. And because you personalize that experience, you personalize what you have experienced. And this is personalizing what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Therefore, you begin to react to it, and you call that reaction my reaction, how I like it, I don't like it. The I becomes very strong. So let Bhante explain this to you, okay?
How the moment the emotional reaction occurs, another interesting thing happens. You see, we first formed an object out there. Once the object is there, you begin to react to that object emotionally. Then there are two things, the object and the reaction. Earlier there was no reaction, but now there is a reaction. The moment the reaction comes up, the object is out there, the reaction is inside here. And what is inside? What do we do to what is inside? We say, this reaction is mine, is my reaction. The moment we say this reaction is mine, that is called personalizing the reaction. That is the meaning of the word Upadhana. Rice Davids used the word grasping or clinging. This is not grasping or clinging, it is calling that mine. That means personalizing. So the moment it is personalized, what happens? How can there be something mine if there is no I? The moment you say this is mine, you have created the I. I comes into being. That I coming into being is called bhava. The word bhava means coming into existence. The I have come into existence. Earlier there was no I here. There was only an object. The moment a desire or a hatred came, mind came, and with the mind came the I. You understood? So the I comes into being by personalizing.
The I comes into being by personalizing. So emotional reaction, tanha, to the feeling of the objective experience leads to personalizing, upadana. And we personalize this reaction as mine. You know, I like it, I don't like it. And this is called the subjective experience. How I feel about it, what I want to do about it, that is the subjective experience. So it's mine, my reaction, right? And with that, personalizing this experience, it creates the notion that, oh, there must be an I. You know, how can I say there is mine if there is no I? So there must be an I that exists. And therefore, we need to have a concept of what is this thing called I. Then it is a self. And the moment we have this notion, the concept of a self, then that means we have created the concept of existence. So the concept of a self has come into existence. So now we begin to create the concept of existence, bhava. Right? So this is what Bhante was saying. He's going to explain a little bit further in a moment, right? With this personalization of the self.
So the moment the I has come into being, another question arises. What did you call the I? Where is the I? The I is only just a concept, but what are you referring to as I? There must be an object to call the I, to refer to the I. What is the object? The I has to exist. How can the I exist? What is the meaning of existence? Existence has to be understood. Existence means, now if you say this cup exists, what does it mean? The cup occupies space, it occupies time. To exist is to occupy space and time. So what is the I that is occupying space and time? The only I that can be occupying space and time is the body. So the body becomes the I. Body is the thing that is occupying space and time. When the body begins to occupy space and time, you can say the body is so many inches tall, so many fat, and all kinds of things you can talk about the body, you see. That is occupying space. The volume of the body, length, breadth and height. So, but occupying time means it has a past, a present and future. To occupy time is to have a past, a present and a future. Now the I is not only just I, but the I has been identified as the body. The body has become the I. So the body has become the self. The body has become the self.
So the body has become the self, because when we begin to say that there is an I, and we say this I is the self, then we need something that exists, because we now created the notion the self exists. So we need something that exists, and the body conveniently exists. And also we are attached to the experience of the body. Because when we see something, the light enters the eye, so the eye is part of the body. The eye is not part of the brain. Right? The nerves are part of the central nervous system, but the eye itself is part of the body. So when we see something, we know that seeing something comes through the eye. right? And smelling something comes through the nose, hearing something comes through the ear. Then we begin to think, oh, if the ears are hearing something, and this thing that I'm hearing is either so pleasant and wonderful and I like it, or this thing that I'm hearing, loud noise I'm hearing, is so awful and disgusting, I hate it. So I begin to like or dislike what I hear. Then hearing through the ears, I begin to think that this body is me, right? So this body is the self. This is really because of the experience coming through the body and the fact that the body occupies space and time. So we think that we exist. So when the concept of I or a self arises, we're looking for something to refer to as the I. And conveniently, the body appears to exist because the body occupies space and time. So we refer to the body as the self that exists occupying space and time. This notion is called Sakkaya Ditthi, right? So therefore, when we begin to react and we personalize the reaction, now this word Upadhana, it's very important to understand the meaning of the word Upadhana. It is translated as craving or clinging or attachment, but the real meaning of Upadhana is personalizing. Why? We break down the word Upadhana into the two main words, Upa and Adhana. Upa means inside, within. Adhana is the opposite of dana. We know what is dana. Dana is giving. Adhana means taking. So Upa Adhana means we are taking it inside. So when you take something and bring it inside, you are personalizing. So we personalize that reaction as my reaction. That is the subjective experience. All this is part of the emotional mind. Right? All the diagrams in all the boxes in pink, that's the emotional mind already, the affective process. So we personalize it and call that this reaction is mine. So personalizing everything we experience, and what we experience is the Panchakanda. That's why the Buddha calls this Pancha Upadana Kanda, personalizing what we are experiencing through the sense organs. And that leads to the creation of the notion of a self, the imaginary self. And this imaginary self exists in the world because we have already determined there is a world out there. Now there is this body that seems to occupy space and time. So this body exists in this world. And that's why we have the notion of this body existing in the world. And this notion is called Sakkaya Ditthi. So if you really want to become a Sotapan, the first thing you must do is to recognize the fact that this body is not me. This body is just a tool that brings information in and being processed, and we become aware of the processing. And the processing is what we call mind. We become aware of it, right? So thinking this body is me, that is Sakkaya Ditthi, the concept of the self. All this part of this affective process, the chitta part of the mind, the emotional part of the mind, affective process. And when the notion of existence arises, all suffering begins to come in. Existence means there is a past, there is a present, and there is a future, because that's what existence means. It has to occupy space, it has to occupy time. The body occupies space. That's why we think we exist, because of this body. We think that this body is me, and I exist because it occupies space, and it occupies time because there is a past of the body, there is a present of the body, there is a future of the body. So when the body becomes attached as the self, then birth, jati, is the past of the body. And as we age day by day, that is the present of the body, the aging. And when the body dies, that is the future of the body, the end of this body, birth, aging, and death. And that leads to all kinds of suffering.
So the body has become the self. The body has become the self. So once the body has become the self, it has the past, present and future. What is the past of the body? Birth. Birth is the past of the body. What is the future of the body? Death. Death is the future of the body. And in between birth and death is what we call aging. So you see, now you are not only having a body, you are not only having a self, you are also having birth, old age and death. With the coming of birth, old age and death, what happens? Grief, lamentation, pain, sorrow and despair. By creating a self, you have created suffering.
So with that comes the whole mass of suffering. With birth, aging, and death comes all kinds of suffering we call the insecurity of life. And the whole mass of suffering arises. Okay, so let's... okay, so basically I think we will end here. It's... yeah, I think we will end here. So what we have covered so far is the cognitive process of mind, the mano, which is the first part. Now, this second part here is the chitta part of mind, the affective process, where we begin to personalize the experience. We react and personalize the reaction, giving to a notion of a self that exists. All these are emotional activities of the mind. And because we think we exist, we begin to see the birth as the past of the body, the aging as the present of the body, and death to be the future of the body. And with that comes the whole mass of suffering. I will continue in more details next week. I will explain a bit more in depth about this reaction, tanha. Right? Why is it that we react? And I will also explain about this personalizing the body, the sakkaya ditthi, why we personalize the body as the self. So I will go deeper into that, bringing a little bit of neuroscience to explain all these things. And if we have time, next week, we will also talk about insecurity of life, but we still can go on one more week after that. So we will have at least 2 more sessions on Paṭiccasamuppāda. So next week, we will talk about tanha and bhava, upadhana, and insecurity of life, dukkha. Okay. So I think with that, I end my sharing. Let me see if there are questions. Now, before I go further, I would like to let you know that you may download the presentation slide from this link. It is working now, so you can go to tiny.cc/awakening8. And if you want the full chart, the Bhante Punnaji's Paṭiccasamuppāda chart, then you can download from this link, tiny.cc/Paṭiccasamuppāda, one word. So you can download those. I will give you the link again in a moment. Okay. And for those of you who have joined us, do click on like so that we know who has joined us. Please do that, right? Click like. Leave a comment if you wish to. So let's see if there are questions to be addressed. Okay, we have one question here. Is avijja the first step or the last step of Paṭiccasamuppāda wheel. Now, Paṭiccasamuppada is not a wheel, right, in that sense, but it is a continuous arising. It's not really a wheel in that sense, but it's a continuous arising life after life, but we can break it. When we become Arahant, it is broken. But what it is happening with each arising, this is actually, okay, the way Bhante Punnaji explained this Paṭiccasamuppada, this is really the way the Buddha observed it happening when the Buddha awoke from the mind being stopped, and that is insentience, starting from avidya. He then observes stage by stage how Paṭiccasamuppada began to arise, and this arising of Paṭiccasamuppada taught him, made him saw very clearly how the mind actually created the world out there, that objective experience, how the mind created the subjective experience that we call in here, and because of this and the reaction, we begin to experience all kinds of suffering. So this is really what Paṭiccasamuppada is teaching us. But a lot of teachers talk about Paṭiccasamuppada as the three-life model: past life, present life, future life. I already explained that in the last sharing. That is the Awakening series number 7. So please go back to number 7 to look through that explanation. Bhante actually explained that the three-life model is not valid, right? And in fact, more and more teachers are now beginning to not agree with the three-life model: the past life, present life, future life. Basically, Paṭiccasamuppada is talking about how the Buddha discovered that the mind, upon waking up, the mind was creating the objective experience and the subjective experience. And as a result of this creation, then it leads to a whole mess of suffering. The Buddha saw this happening when he first woke up and became the Sammasambuddha. He woke up from his stopping of the mind. And at that point of stopping the mind was avidya. So this is Bhante Punnaji's explanation of this Paṭiccasamuppada, that this is how the mind created objective experience, subjective experience, and the whole mess of suffering that came along with it. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Sister Nora. By the way, for the rest of you, please welcome Sister Nora all the way from New Mexico. Mexico City, actually, I'm sorry. All the way from Mexico City. Thank you for joining us very early morning at your place right now. Okay, thank you, Sister Nora. It's very kind of you to join us. Okay. Now, if you're still having any questions about this, Sister Nora, please feel free to ask me the question again. I'll elaborate further. What is it that you need me to elaborate? Okay. So now there is another question from Sister Nora. How does mind as sense arise to produce sankhara? Okay, the mind does not produce sankhara. Sankhara produces the mind. It is the sankhara, right? The putting together of sensations that lead to consciousness. Now, I explained this in Panchakanda, very deep detail. So go back to Awakening series number 1 and number 2, and you will see there explanation of the Panchakanda, the 5 aggregates, how light enters the eye and stimulate the light-sensitive cells in the eye. And because of this stimulation, this impulse is brought to the brain, and the brain processes it. And this processing is sankhara. And with this sankhara, then we become conscious. So it's actually sankhara that produces the consciousness. If there is sankhara, there is consciousness. If there is no sankhara, there is no consciousness. That's why when the Bodhisattva Siddhartha was reached a point where the mind had stopped, that there is no sankhara. That's why there was no consciousness, avidya. But somehow the brain kick-started, and sankhara started, and then consciousness started. So the mind does not produce sankhara. It is sankhara that produce the experience of the mind. Right? So the mind is not an object, not an entity, it's an activity. So sankhara is the activity that produce this experience that we call mind. So if you want details about how each sense organ is stimulated by activities in the environment, that is explained in Paṭiccasamuppāda in the Awakening series number 1 and number 2. So I hope you can go there and look through that before the next sharing, so you get a bit better idea. So I hope that answers this part of your question. Please feel free to post another question later on if you wish to, if this is not clear. Let me see. Okay, so I think that is all. Thank you. And yeah. Okay, I think that is all. All right. So please download the presentation slide, tiny.cc/awakening8. And then the chart, tiny.cc Paṭiccasamuppāda, and also don't forget the soft copy of that book, level 3 book, the Arya Magga Bhavana level 3. I have here. So this is the Arya Magga Bhavana level 3. You can't get the print copies anymore because nobody's going to send it to you. Many the International Postal Service is not working, so you won't be getting anything coming through the post. And then the chart, Bhante Punnaji's chart, Paṭiccasamuppāda chart, complete chart. So you can download that. All right. So with that, I end my sharing. We have. I just want to take a quick look. Any more questions? No, there are no more questions. Okay, good. So we spent the last hour and a half together sharing the Dharma, and as a result of doing that, we have accumulated a lot of good merits. We are the fortunate people who are able to sit here and appreciate the Dharma, whereas there are still so many people out there suffering from the coronavirus pandemic. So with accumulation of these good merits we have acquired, let us now put our palms together and share our merits with all the people suffering from the coronavirus pandemic. And let's recite this together. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining us. I wish you all stay safe. Please, may you be healthy, well, comfortable, peaceful, and happy, and have a good evening. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Good night. And good morning to those of you in America. Okay.